Well, it's been a little bit since we've had Mark Hall on. Mark Hall now is the director of Wild Origins Canada, has taken big strides in Canada, has grown a following, has grown a profile, super proud of what is happening in Canada. And we haven't had Mark on the podcast for quite some time. But he said, hey, I want to come on the podcast because I've got some things that I want to push forward. Specifically some projects that I want to push forward. And I said, okay, well, are any of them controversial? He says, everything is controversial in what I do.
That's for sure.
Mark, welcome back, dude. It's been a while.
Thanks.
Introduce yourself for those that may not remember who you are.
Yeah, well, you gave the introduction. Director of the Wild Origins Canada Foundation. So we have a non-profit, federally registered corporation, not-for-profit, in Canada set up, the Wild Origins Canada Foundation, and we're growing that. We will become a registered charity, like you have the 501c down in the U.S. We have charitable tax status, so we're working towards that. And yeah, we are growing our voice. We're, I guess, becoming an authority, a trusted source of sustainable use information in Canada. And there isn't anything in this country that we won't wade into that are incredibly political, tricky, and prickly issues. A lot around Indigenous conflicts in Manitoba. There's blockades happening, hunting season's coming up. We're covering that we take heat for that. And this Project Grizzly Balance in Western Canada, it is probably one of the next big prickly issues about sustainable use and the conservation of grizzly bears. And we're wading into that sandbox in a big way.
So Project Grizzly Balance is the project we want to talk about today. Give us a little bit of history on what has happened, what has transpired to get us to today. And then I think the next question after that I'll ask is, so why are we deciding to do this now? So let's just talk about the history. Grizzly bear hunting has been banned in British Columbia, right?
Yes, it was banned in British Columbia and also in Alberta. They were
did it happen at the same time?
No, different years. I think Alberta was I'm just trying to remember now, before British Columbia.
Okay,
maybe
interesting.
2010, somewhere in there. British Columbia was 2016, just after a provincial election, and then it kind of came in full force. I think it was 2017 or 2018. So it's been a decade in BC and more so in Alberta. But you can still hunt grizzly bears in the Yukon, in the Northwest Territories, and in a little corner of Nunavut Territory, but not in British Columbia or Alberta. First Nations can hunt grizzly bears in all of the provinces and territories because they have constitutionally protected rights to continue their way of life in hunting, which includes grizzly bears. Unfortunately, they've lost their ability to manage them as a predator in some places because licensed hunters are removed. Their outfitting industries, those that had outfitting businesses or guides were impacted. So to really way back up, the interesting thing about this project, which is kind of sort of coming full circle for me, the reason I'm sitting here is because of the grizzly bear ban in British Columbia. And this is where it all started for me.
Really?
Because when the controversy...
Had hunter conservationist happened, was it hunter conservationist an existing entity before the grizzly bear ban?
This is why it came about, actually.
Wow.
So when the debate came, so leading up to a provincial election in British Columbia, there was a whole bunch of controversy in the media about grizzly bear hunting and trophy hunting, and these negative stories that were front page news, this sort of thing. And it was really starting to ramp up. There had been some conflicts between a bear viewing operation and a guiding operation on coastal British Columbia, and it was bubbling up. When it was coming up to the 2016 election, the leader of the NDP party in British Columbia basically put it into their election platform that if they were elected, they would ban the grizzly bear hunt. And then everything kind of blew up, and all these narratives started happening. And I was on the pulse of that. I was watching all of this, and something very interesting started to come to light for me. And it was, one, hunters in British Columbia were getting slammed and, painted and mud slapped on them. They were reaching out to celebrities in the US saying, you need to help us. You need to wade into this. In particular, through social media, I saw a lot of people reaching out to Stephen Ranella. They said, like, hey, Steve, you came up to British Columbia with Cal. You try to get a grizzly bear hunt, try to get yourself a grizzly bear. Like, help us cover the story, like, say something. And it was crickets. And I really realized that Canada lacked a voice. So there was some very powerful voices, happening in the States, internationally, and people that were becoming, very recognized. But it wasn't Canada. Canada wasn't their history. Canada wasn't their culture. Canada wasn't where they could only hunt or what they cared most about. And I realized that Canada was lacking that voice. And so I started writing, and I started wading into the grizzly bear issue, saying, like, okay, hang on a second here, folks. Let's back up. Let's look at the science, challenge some of these narratives that were out there. And that led to the Hunter Conservationist podcast. The very first podcast, episode 1, was with a friend of ours, Dr. Clayton Lamb, who was a grizzly bear researcher. And we kind of dove into the whole nuance of what he was learning through his PhD research, and kind of grizzly bears moving into human settlement areas basically was kind of what he dug into. And we were off to the races and opened up the scope, and we're covering everything in Canada. And here I am sitting here almost 10 years later.
That is an amazing story. I didn't even know that story, man. That's crazy. That episode number 1 was about grizzly bears.
Yes. Yeah. And episode 100 was also about grizzly bears, which was with Dr. Bruce McClellan, who
is Dr. Clayton Lamb still around?
Oh yeah, he's still around.
Is he still a grizzly bear biologist?
He does grizzly bear. He's now got like numerous projects on the go. Endangered caribou conservation work. He's working in an Indigenous-led caribou recovery project in northern British Columbia. He's still, and I can get into this, he is running one of the only grizzly bear studies in southern British Columbia, because the government got out of the business of doing research when it banned hunting, because there was no need to worry about grizzly bears, now that the greatest threat to the species, which was removed, and it went away. But episode 100 was with Dr. Bruce McClellan. He was probably one of the most recognized and respected grizzly bear scientists in the world. He was a government researcher. He worked for the government. He researched grizzly bears. He grew up with grizzly bears. He raised his kids in the Flathead Valley in southern British Columbia up against the Montana border, which at the time had the highest density of grizzly bears in all of North America.
Wow.
His kids grew up in that. His daughter is now a grizzly bear researcher, Dr.
That is crazy.
Michelle McClellan, had her on the show. But doing grizzly bear research as a government person, they only work a couple of hours a day, and all this kind of stuff, and they don't have a lot of accountability. Bruce was a scientist. Bruce was first and foremost for grizzly bears for sustainable use, and he published peer-reviewed science as a government researcher, and that's almost unheard of here. Not unheard of in the U.S. A lot of government biologists publish, and that's cool. We lacked it up here. So he was episode 100, and we dove into grizzly bear hunting and grizzly bear conservation and management.
Is he still a governmental scientist today?
He retired.
Okay.
And this was one of the consequences of banning grizzly bear hunting that I mentioned in British Columbia, is the general thought within the anti-hunting community, because we have a huge philanthropic organization here in BC that's powering the stop the hunt type thing, or don't ever bring it back. And within government, that once hunting was removed, there wasn't a lot of need for grizzly bear research. It was they're fine now. And when Dr. McClellan, Tony Hamilton, when those fellows retired, that was it. The government did not replace them. There were during hunting of grizzly bears, there were 4 scientists in British Columbia researching grizzly bear populations in different regions, because we're big. Bruce was like the eminent authority of the interior grizzly, Rocky Mountains, southern parts of BC, and some of the other fellows, specialized in other areas. And we're now down to 1. And he's actually, by his doctorate and thesis, he's not actually a grizzly bear scientist, but he is the large carnivore scientist for the government. One person for all of British Columbia. And if you remember, if you took British Columbia and superimposed it on the U.S., it would stretch from the international boundary between Seattle and Vancouver all the way to the Mexican border and take in all of the western states. That is how big British Columbia is. One large carnivore specialist, of which grizzly bears are one of the largest, conservation species, and that was a consequence. Government-led research, none. Like I said, there is a couple
black bears
independent
fall under that carnivore biologist, or do they have a separate black bear biologist?
Yeah, no. So that one person has everything: wolves, grizzly bears, cougars, and black bears, and that's it. And it's all policy driven. So the province supports some of the outside grizzly bear research that's being done, like the Dr. Clayton Lamb is still working on, but he's not leading the science. The province is not leading the science anymore. And this is one of the reasons I'm getting into this Project Grizzly Balance in a big way, is I feel, watching the pulse of what's happening in Alberta, what's happening in British Columbia, and I'm worried about the banned grizzly bear hunting campaigns in the Yukon and the Northwest Territories getting hold, is I feel, since the end of hunting, since the end of sustainable use of grizzly bears, that people and grizzly bears are worse off. We have a worse situation now in Western Canada because we don't have sustainable use hunting as a component of grizzly bear conservation. There are populations that are exploding in Alberta and northern British Columbia. There are places where they potentially could disappear because they're suffering genetic bottlenecks, lack of emigration out of the population, some very serious stuff. But it's a gigantic, landmass where grizzly bears are. You got to manage them on a population by population basis, and they're all different. But as a general, overarching thing, what I'm seeing is rural people are being dismissed. Their concerns, their fears, what they're living with are being dismissed because the narratives are being controlled in British Columbia. They're being controlled in Alberta. Folks that stand up for some level of sustainable use and citizen, authorized, hunting, they're being dismissed. They're being silenced. They're being challenged. We get it whenever we wade into it, and we'll probably get a lot more of it. And I think grizzly bears are worse off because there is no sustainable use. So like I mentioned before, one, there's very little science being done on it anymore because...
Well, it ties to the value argument, right?
It
At
does.
to the highest
It
level. The
does.
government doesn't value grizzly bears anymore, so they're not putting any money behind investing in research anymore. It has no value to them.
And it exactly. And you know, and I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding, you know, even at the highest levels in government or in politics, because they're being controlled by this anti-hunting narrative, what to believe and what not to believe, is folks at the highest level of policy making in, you know, British Columbia believe that hunting was the single greatest threat to grizzly bears, and once you remove that, they're good. Park it, check mark, grizzly bears, okay, let's move on to something else, jobs, economy, you know, whatever. We got elected based on that platform, and that's just not true. So here's an example of how this is impacting grizzly bears. Grizzly bear conservation itself is the North Cascade Grizzly Bear Population Management Unit is in southwestern British Columbia, coastal mountain area grizzly bear population. They overlap into the Cascades of Washington, which everybody knows that's where there's a big momentum gaining for a grizzly bear reintroduction project. There's First
How have they
Nation
not
in British
spilled over
Columbia.
already?
There's so few bears.
Oh, there's few bears. Unlike
There's
the other
so
opposite
few of
kind,
them.
where opposite
Yep.
side where it's close to the Montana border, you got the highest density of bears, and they're
Yeah.
spilling
So
over.
those are literally on the opposite sides of the province. So let's just, for, you know, folks in the States listening, just north of you know, kind
Essentially,
of
is there a continental
northeast of
divide that
Seattle
comes
versus
into
Missoula.
BC?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you've got coastal mountains, sort of the interior Selkirk-Purcell mountain range and the Rocky Mountains. So grizzly bears are doing very well in the Rocky Mountain region. They're doing very well in the north, more wilderness areas, and in the southeast, the more populated areas, the big centers. This North Cascade Population Management Unit, transboundary, they've recognized on the U.S. side that grizzly bears are at risk of disappearing. They have identified that they're at risk of disappearing in British Columbia, the northern extent of their range, because they're suffering from genetic bottleneck. And what that means is there's just a very small genetic population of bears that's slowly. The number of bears are shrinking, and the genetic pool is shrinking with that. There's no major movement of bears coming in and out of this population. They're not connecting with populations to the north and to the east. And so that's death. That's the death nail for any animal population, is dwindling in numbers. Males and females have trouble finding each other, and they're traveling more. They're getting run over on railroad tracks and whatnot. So this is something major. This requires a lot of science. What's going on? Like, we got to be on the pulse. We should have half a dozen research projects on the go. We should have some recovery targets. We should have some clear, identifiable actions of what's actually happening, and like, let's get recovering these bears. They banned the hunt. Almost 10 years went by, and they finally released a draft grizzly bear conservation management plan for the province a year ago. And that population management unit has no firm commitments of things like science, funding, targets. Like, what population do they actually want? There's nothing. It's just a bunch of vague motherhood statements of, like, you know, oh, we want to see like a self-sustaining population of grizzly bears in the North Cascades, and we want to invest in their conservation and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, great, like, put some things on paper so people know what you're doing and how that's going to lead to recovery. And I feel that has been a consequence of banning the hunt. Is there's no firm targets, there's no data, there's no science, there's nothing for anybody to go on other than just these wishy-washy, you know, broad motherhood statements. And as you know, a management plan has got to come down to who's doing what, when, and why are we doing this? Let's do it. Is it working? Yes or no? And adjust as we go.
What about how did they get so isolated? How did how long have they?
It's a combination of geography, like
Had they
mountains,
always been isolated, or was there immigration that just got cut off through, you know?
Yeah, I mean through development.
Okay.
So on the BC side, so your major highways, your major cities, to the east and to the north, and big recreational developments, and your major highway corridors, and just some really, really ugly, rocky terrain, coastal mountains, and these bears probably at the best of times, maybe mingled more with the coastal populations, but the coastal areas got taken over by the metropolis of Vancouver and all of that, and so that's it. There they were, combination of geography and human development of the landscape. Put them into this little compartment where there's very, very little mixing. So that's where we got to come into putting collars on bears and understanding their movement. Where's their corridors? How, why are bears not getting from A to B? What's in their way? Start looking at, highway overpasses and connective corridors and, all of those types of conservation strategies. When we had hunting, yes, they're a sensitive species. They're slow reproducers. We have to be very careful.
You're about to
when
call
we
them
harvest
a
grizzly bears.
K-selected species. Explain to everyone what is a K-selected species, Mark.
So a K-selected species, I'll get it. Sorry for the science stuff. I nerd out on it. A K-selected species is an animal whose basically their reproduction rates are very slow. They will have their young in tow for a long period of time. They have very few offspring, one or two kind of thing, and numbers of years to raise those offspring. And their growth, their maturity, to when that animal first is able to reproduce itself. So in biology, nothing really happens in a population until an offspring is able to replace itself. And until you reach that point, your population hasn't done anything. For grizzly bears, it's about 10 years. So when that cub's born, if it's a female, it's going to take 10 years before she produces her own litter. So she has to survive, and her offspring have to survive. So she replaces herself, and we can say, yes, there has been an incremental increase in the population. What's happening in southern British Columbia is almost, there was a meta study done. So anyways, K-selected species, slow reproducers,
long-lived,
very sensitive, long-lived, very sensitive to human-caused mortality. So it's not just hunting. If you're running them over with cars, if you're running them over with trains, if you're killing them left, right, and because of human conflict, their populations can easily be put into a spiral, and the animals can be easily put into an endangered or a recovery status type thing. Hunting, when you fit hunting into that of a K-selected species, you got to heavily rely on data. You better be on top of your populations. You better be monitoring them. You better know every single animal, especially females, that are run over on a highway, what their age was, what population they were from, and then what can be safely allocated to sustainable use hunting. And you got to stay on top of that. Like, it's in British Columbia, they worked on about a 5 to 6% human-caused mortality because of the sensitivity of grizzly bears. BC had world-class science. We were doing an amazing job at blending hunting into this total human-caused mortality. Sometimes hunting seasons were shut down. Sometimes 2 weeks before my brother-in-law's clients came in who booked a hunt 2 years before, he gets a phone call saying, "Hey, we looked at the data. Too many females got killed in your zone last year. Your permit's canceled for this spring, 2 weeks before his hunter showed up."
Wow.
But that's how sensitive, managing a K-selected species is. And when we had hunting, we had the rigor of the science. We had the data. We were looking at this combination of overall human-caused mortality and adjusting the one that we control, which was hunting. When hunting was banned, no research, We lost all that data. We lost having our finger on the pulse of what these grizzly bear populations were doing. And that is showing up as a consequence to populations like the North Cascade grizzly bear population. There's no science. Nobody knows what's going on. We don't even know the numbers. We don't know where they're moving. Yet the best they can do now is they don't have data-driven objectives. They just have, objectives that look good on paper, to the public. Oh yeah, no, that's a feel good statement, right? That's not going to work for grizzly bears. So, part of what I'm developing and leading into Project Grizzly Balance is coming at it from the heart of grizzly bear conservation. Yes, they are a sensitive species. There's a lot of different dynamics going on. And I do fundamentally believe that sustainable use can fit into the big picture of grizzly bear conservation. And what I'm seeing in the loss of science, the loss of social tolerance, the increasing conflict, the increasing human-caused mortality, and no sustainable use is part of that whatsoever. I am equally worried about the future of grizzly bears, especially in the southern parts of Alberta and British Columbia, as I am about the opportunity for hunters to be able to have an experience hunting a grizzly bear. It's equally important to me.
Are the First Nations undertaking any science?
There is a scientific project that was just kicked off a month and a bit ago in a wilderness area in northern British Columbia. It's a collaborative effort. The funding is coming from Safari Club International Foundation. They are working with the Tahltan central government and their wildlife biologists, because the initial question, the initial hey, we need to know what's going on, is coming from the Tahltan people and the outfitters up there. They're very concerned that this burgeoning grizzly bear population in northern British Columbia is having a significant impact on caribou and moose, which is their primary sustenance species. Outfitters rely on them. And so they've matched up with Safari Club International Foundation. They're putting collars. It's a collaborative, SCIF and Tahltan Central Government Research Project. So that's about kind of the only one that I know of. Yeah.
So in your Project Grizzly Balance,
good stuff.
Yeah, in your Project Grizzly Balance, what are some of the things that you want to implement?
So, the overarching premises is I want to balance the narrative about grizzly bears and about the role of sustainable use as a part of grizzly bear conservation, because that narrative has shifted away from that, like I said at the start. What is being left out of the broader picture of the conservation of grizzly bears are the voices and the on-the-ground experience of the people living closest to grizzly bears: ranchers, farmers, hunters, trappers, outfitters, First Nations. They're all being marginalized because this is a group of people that are advocating for some level of sustainable use back into the mix. So one of my first and foremost objectives is I want to start championing those voices and letting the masses hear what these people have to say, because they are being squashed and silenced and bullied and threatened with lawsuits to keep the hell quiet. Like that's literally, what's happening. In British Columbia, there is a philanthropist who is made his wealth from home construction in the recreational area of the Whistler Blackcomb Resort area outside of Vancouver. He created a foundation called the Grizzly Bear Foundation. Super well funded, man. They got staff and they can do all kinds of stuff. They're basically so embedded in the government, controlling the narrative about grizzly bear management in British Columbia, that the government has actually handed them the development of the policy for the management and conservation of grizzly bears. So you have an outside agency organization writing public policy that's leaving out most of the voices in the province. So I want to interject ourselves back into that. In Alberta, you have a much more favorable political climate because the government there and Minister Todd Lowen are doing some good things on the grizzly bear sustainable use front. They are, more pro-sustainable use. However, there is a large organization in Alberta, again, well-funded from a philanthropist couple. I believe they're from Calgary, that are behind a foundation called the Exposed Wildlife Conservancy, and they dominate the narrative in Alberta about grizzly bear conservation, and constantly attacking the government, the minister, and hunters over any inkling of reintroducing hunting as a management tool. In the Yukon, there's a foundation up there that's starting to push the anti-hunting narrative. I don't think they have the big, philanthropic power behind them yet. And so it's just a matter of time, or someone else comes out of the woodwork, or one of these organizations in BC or Alberta saying, we're going to expand our mission, and here's millions of dollars, get the grizzly bear hunt canceled in the Yukon and the Northwest Territories. And then my fear is, where the balance is being maintained in those territories, you're going to ban grizzly bear hunting and then adopt all the problems that we're having in Alberta and British Columbia.
Right.
People and grizzly bears will be worse off. So I want to get those voices back out there. I want to get into developing a documentary film which spotlights those rural voices, those rural realities of living, with grizzly bears, or a series of documentaries. They're powerful medium for us at Origins Foundation, as a global whole, to tell stories through that. I want to deliver what I call a commission on grizzly bear management, and what I want to have is some formal process where people can make presentations to us, to a board, which then are documented and turned into a what we heard type document. But it's going to focus on marginalized voices, the people that are not being heard in grizzly bear management and stewardship, and then have a document that would be available for policymakers to say, you've got to start listening and incorporating the values of these people, because these organizations that you've got in bed with are ignoring that. Going to have a specific podcast, again, to amplify these marginalized voices, all of our social media stuff. I'd love to get into some billboard campaigns, some bus stop campaigns, to start to put some of these ideas into the moderate middle out there in society, because they're only hearing, one side. And I'd like us to be able to get a seat at the table, especially in British Columbia, and sort of move away from the Grizzly Bear Foundation having control over the development of public policy, at least be able to comment, review, and be there, so that we can interject some balance into this. And, it's, another part that sort of concerns me. I see it in Alberta and I see it in British Columbia. When you take hunting away, bears lose their value, and they're not just losing their value with hunters going, I don't care about grizzly bears. If I have a problem, I'm just going to shoot one and not tell anybody. Like, you hear all that sort of stuff. But it's a reality. I mean, when I look at the statistics for grizzly bears, one thing I'm seeing in both Alberta and British Columbia is the rate at which grizzly bears are being killed is going up since the end of the hunt. They are getting run over on highways and run over by trains, and like sometimes en masse, like 4 bears killed by one train, one shot, a sow and 3 cubs, an hour east of me, last year, a year ago. Like, it's breakneck speed. And when I look at data sets of known human caused mortality, poaching cases, these sorts of things where the governments have a handle, they're able to confirm, there's this big unknown category. Bears are being found dead, and no evidence to lay charges, so it's not in a poaching category, it's just an unknown. And honestly, I think what's happening is that's the shoot, shovel, shut up thing. And it's happening everywhere. It's happening everywhere in Alberta and BC, because people have been pushed too far. They're tired
Mm-hmm.
of living in fear. They're tired of worrying about their kids on rural ranch properties, their livelihoods, outfitters, the hunters, that all of this, and people are just tired. They've been pushed socially too far. And it doesn't, one of the
And
things
it's
you've
not
seen this in
helping the
Africa.
animal. It's not helping the
Not at
animal at
all.
all.
It's this uncontrolled human caused mortality, which is affecting, the species as a whole, because the numbers are pretty high in some
Yep.
places. And so there's this social value that's been lost because hunting has been banned. And even if rural people go, hey, there's a hunting season, we've seen some grizzly bear hunters in here this spring, they have a general sense that there's something proactive being done. They're going to try to remove a bear out of an area or something like that. There's this sort of, yeah, okay, somebody's doing something, somebody's managing the grizzly bears, we're going to remove a few out of this valley. That makes us feel better. Even if it's more like a placebo effect, that's okay. But when you take that away, people are like, I got a bear, he's killed this, or he's done, whatever, or the kid's waiting at the bus stop or something. Nothing happens. Next thing you know,
Somebody's
somebody
going to take
finds
it
a
into
dead
their own hands.
bear, in a ditch. And I don't see that Canada is above those basic human elements. Like, we see it in India, we see it in Africa, we see it in South America, all over the world. When it comes down to your livelihood and your family's lives, people kill tigers, they kill leopards, they kill jaguars, they kill bears. And it's done in a very, very brutal way. Like, the work that the guys are doing in India, they don't even have firearms. So the rural people are bludgeoning these animals to death and then celebrating them and dismembering them and walking around saying, here's the leopard that killed so-and-so's livestock. We're not above that in this country. And if you think somehow we're different, people are the same. You'll protect your livelihood and you'll protect your family. The consequence is grizzly bears are a case-selected species, and when there is this shoot, shovel, and shut up thing going on, then we truly have a conservation problem, and it's happening. I believe that sustainable use hunting can play a role in reducing the overall number of bears that are dying at the hands of people, because there's an element of sustainable use that satisfies a tremendous amount of rural people, that grizzly bears are being hunted. We're not trying to eradicate them, but they're satisfied that something proactive is being done. Their voices are being heard.
So what can people do? If somebody's like, man, I want to get involved, I want to be involved in this Project Grizzly Balance, what's the next steps
So
for someone?
we got a number of things on the go. So go to the Origins Foundation's webpage to projects. You will find Project Grizzly Balance, and you can support us in achieving some of these big goals, like the commission, so marginalized voices can be put in front of policymakers, a documentary or series of
A
documentaries so we can
billboard
reach
or
the
something.
masses, a billboard, all that stuff. That's going to take money. And we need to be able to fight this fight to be on par with the philanthropists that are fueling the engines that are preventing sustainable use hunting. We need to get on their level, and that's going to take a lot. So you can support us in a big way if you're an organization that's pro-sustainable use, pro-science-based grizzly bear management. As an individual, you can become part of that. And I'm also going to be looking for people that spend a lot of time on the ground to report back to me what they're seeing. I need this railroad of information coming into us as a hub to saying, this is what I'm seeing, this is what's going on. I just got back from this fly-in float plane trip and this is what happened to us. Like, every story, farmer, a rancher, a something or other that's living in this world of being closest to grizzly bears, I need to hear your stories. Because they are a real part of grizzly bear management and sustainable use. It's not just all data and numbers that scientists collect. What people are seeing, what people's values are, the experiences you have are real. And collectively, that in my mind is data that needs to be part of the considerations in all of these Western Canada jurisdictions when it comes to grizzly bear management. So become part of grizzly bear management, part of Project Grizzly Balance as an information source.
Awesome. Well, it's going to be great. I'm really excited about the voice that you're going to carry. It is trepidatious. Is that a word? Trepidatious waters.
Yep.
Because you're going up against juggernauts. But that's not what we're afraid of. We're not afraid to go up against the biggest and the loudest voices that are opposed to a sustainable use lifestyle. So, Mark, we're with you. Everybody
absolutely.
else, if you are interested in getting a hold of Mark, you can DM him through Wild Origins Canada. You can email him at mark@wildorigins.org, and also check out the webpage that has a bunch of information around Project Grizzly Balance. Thanks,
Perfect.
Mark.
Thank you.
All right.